Oh. Well, good morning, church. Wow, there are a lot. There are a lot on certain days. Can we just agree? Both of them together. That should be against the rules. Lynn and I got back from a conference last night from Foursquare. Michael was there, so was Christy. And I got to teach a breakout on worship and really start developing other leaders in our area. And it was a lot of fun, and it was really, really life-giving because I love being able to develop people and help them go further. And that's what we've been doing in this series. In this series, we've been trying to develop us to go further. We've been in the last several weeks in a series titled Follower, right? And listen, what we've been examining is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus, what it means and the implications of being a follower of Jesus. Because sometimes we get things a little messed up. We get things a little bit confused, right? We sometimes pursue rules over relationship because we can control rules, can't we? That's what the religious people, they love rules because rules, you can easily figure out if someone's following them or not. You can easily tell if someone's measuring up or they aren't. You can start correcting people and putting them in the boxes because rules are easier than relationship, right? And so rules are what we implement in our lives to kind of try to get us to look apart or act apart or toe a certain line, right? So it's easy to create a template and say, this is what a follower looks like. And everybody should look like this and go through the same cookie cutter. And if you don't look like this, you're not a very good follower. You know, don't work on the Sabbath, don't eat certain foods, don't smoke, chew, and run what girls do, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. But we see as Jesus, he kind of shatters what society thinks of as a template for what it means to be a follower, things that make people appear and look holy, because he's totally in pursuit of relationship with you and with me. He's pursuing people that the religious people of the day couldn't understand, because why would he pursue people who didn't look holy? Why would he pursue people who didn't look the part? Why would this person, this respected teacher, pursue people who didn't fit the mold that everybody thought they should fit? The thing is, Jesus wasn't interested in making people good. Let me say that again because it's weird to hear in church. Jesus wasn't interested in making people good. He was interested in people following him. He was interested in people patterning their life after him. He didn't say, hey, you have to be good. You better be good. You better stop that. In fact, we saw that when he called Matthew, right? In the first week of this series, we saw Jesus walk up to Matthew at the tax collector's booth. And Jesus simply said, follow me. And he didn't have to learn like a secret handshake. He didn't have to go through a 12-step program. He didn't have to read a book, go through a curriculum. Jesus said, follow me. And Matthew followed. That's how Matthew became a disciple. There wasn't a rule he had to follow. There wasn't a template he had to pattern his life after. Jesus said, start following me and you're going to figure it out. So it doesn't matter, right? If you start following Jesus, you don't automatically become perfect. If you start following Jesus, you don't automatically have peace everywhere in your life. If you start following Jesus, it doesn't mean that all the ramifications of the life that you've lived up to that moment still don't have an effect on you, right? But what it does mean is we're now known as something we weren't known as before. We're known as a Christian, right? Which has a bunch of baggage in today's society, this word Christian. And Christian just simply means Christ follower. It means little Christ. That's what it means in its original language, right? And so we need to ask ourselves before we go any further this morning, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be this little Christ? What does it mean to when we agree to be a follower of Jesus? If we aren't perfect, if we aren't suddenly worry-free, if suddenly things aren't perfect, if we don't look the part, what does it mean? One of my favorite things is the Bible doesn't leave us wondering about this question. Jesus tells us exactly what it means. And we're going to get to what he said in just a minute in John 13, but I want to set the stage first. Jesus is days away from being betrayed and crucified. He's days away from what we know as the triumphal entry, and then Good Friday, and then Easter. And he has his disciples around him, and he says, guys, I'm only going to be with you a little bit longer. I'm going to go away. And his disciples start going, well, where are you going? Can we go with you? And they're like, and Jesus responds, he's like, no, where I'm going, you can't go yet. And now he's got their attention. And Jesus doesn't waste a crisis, right? When he has their attention, he's going to use it to absolutely change their focus. He says, listen, I want you to understand, I'm going away, but I'm going to leave something specific for you to do. I'm going to go away, and I'm leaving a task for you. And the disciples are trying to figure out how they can convince Jesus to take them with them, right? The disciples are trying to figure out their counter argument. Okay, maybe John can't go, but can James go, right? Like they're trying to figure out how can we angle to go with Jesus. And how many of you, when people tell you something you don't want to hear, you pay attention to every detail, right? Because you're trying to figure out how you're going to make your counter argument. You're trying to figure out how you're going to come against what they said so that they change their mind, right? So Jesus said, listen, I'm not going to be with you very much longer. And they're trying to figure out how they can convince Jesus to let him go. And so Jesus pivots because he has his attention. He's not going to waste this moment. And what he tells them changes their perspective. It changes our perspective. And it should change the church's perspective from here into eternity. Jesus says this in verse 34. He says, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. He said, listen, I've taught you a lot. You've seen me do a lot of things. You've seen me teach on a lot of things. And you've heard me talk about even God's commands. And you could sum them up, love your neighbor as yourself, but I'm going to give you something brand new. He said, I'm giving you a commandment. He said, you've followed me, you've seen me teach, you know what I'm able to do, but now I'm going to give you something new. And this new thing I'm going to tell you to do is going to put you on a path of continually following me. He says, love each other. I'm going to give you a new commandment. Love each other. In other words, elevate the importance of relationship with other people around you. But then he takes it up a notch. He says, I have a new command, love one another. And he says, just as I have loved you, you should love each other. In other words, don't love like you see the world love. Don't love like you see society love. Don't love like you see people outside of relationship. Don't love like the religious. Don't love like the world. Love like me. You've seen what I have done. Love like me. He's reminding his disciples the way he loved them. He says, Matthew, remember when I walked up to you in your tax collector's booth? Remember when you were Matthew the despised? Matthew the outcast? Remember that? Remember how I required nothing of you? Love everyone around you just like that. He's reminding them, like, love the way that I have loved. Pursue the lost, the hurt, the broken, just like me. And Jesus says, when you do that, something happens. He says, when you do that, he says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you're my disciple. Your love, which is interesting. Because it's not about our voting record, and it's not about how right we are, and it's not about our arguments, and it's not about what news channel we watch. It's about the way we love. He says, the way you love one another will show the world that you are one of my disciples. So that means your love, the way you love, how you love, the love you show will prove to everybody who's watching who it is you are following. This is huge, right? It'll absolutely solidify the minds of the world that's watching whether or not you and I are Jesus followers. But the problem is this. Loving like Jesus will cost us something. And we don't like that. We like it to be easy, right? Loving like Jesus and living like Jesus will always cost us something. We've talked about things like this before. And listen, because what happens is instead of letting what people have done to us have our focus, instead of allowing the other actions of other people to influence how we make decisions, we have to allow the one we are following to influence the way we make decisions. And so it costs us something. It costs us the right of revenge. It costs us the right of getting somebody back. It costs us the ability to make someone feel the way they made us feel, right? Following Jesus will always cost us something, and loving like Jesus will cost us something. So instead of costing something, what religious people do is we focus on ourselves. And we go, well, that costs too much. It's so much easier to just look the part. It's so much easier to look a certain way and to talk a certain way and to have the secret handshake and to do these things that make me look the part, but my heart doesn't reflect the one I claim to be following. And what happens is we hold to the rules and behaviors that make us feel good about ourselves, and give us the opportunity in our mind to still treat people around us poorly. We focus on how good we look, how great we are as a Christian. But Jesus said you're not going to be known by how good you look, by how good you are keeping the rules, about how Christian-y you are, about how much scripture you know. You're going to be known by the way you love. See, the thing about discipline is it's good, isn't it? Discipline is good. Discipline keeps us in shape. Discipline keeps us moving toward our target. Discipline sometimes even helps us make new and better decisions. But the problem is we often we kind of confuse discipline with disciple, right? Discipleship is being changed toward the one you are following, right? It's becoming more like the one you say you're following. Discipline is good. And we know there's biblical truth, right? We know there's truth in the Bible, that it's absolute, that it's not like subjective, and your truth does not overwhelm biblical truth. That's not how that works. We know there's truth, but my truth has to come from something, right? It's got to be grounded in something. So rules can be good, but they don't necessarily reflect the one that we're following. If we're not loving like Jesus, if we're not talking like Jesus, if we're not calling people into relationship like Jesus, it impacts how people see the Jesus we claim to be following. So what does loving like Jesus look like? Well, we know the whole 1 Corinthians verse, love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy, does not boast. If you've been to a wedding, you've heard that before, right? And it's a good list, but there's another list that Paul writes in the book of Colossians that we're going to go into this morning, and it's Colossians chapter 3, and it gives us a great look as to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what one looks like. And so this is what Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. He says, since God chose you, just like Matthew, right? Just like Matthew was chosen, since God chose you to be a holy people he loves, be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves. In other words, you must have this thing that you put on that when other people look at you, it's evident, right? It's clear. And it's not a show, because we're going to see in a minute it has ramifications. It's not how we look, it's what we do. It's what people interact with when they come into proximity with us, when they encounter us. He says we must clothe ourselves. Now, when Paul talks about clothing ourselves, he's not talking about literal clothing. He's talking about this idea of putting on something that when people look at us and when they interact with us, they're going to interact with something that makes them think of Jesus. And so it's not like a Christian t-shirt, right? Like that shouldn't be a thing, but we have them, right? That's out there. So this idea of clothing, is an imagery for people to change their mentality, their way of thinking, so they can start going, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to look like. This is the person I'm supposed to be. So Paul says, clothe yourselves, and he gives us a very specific list. He says, clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy. Clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy. Now, Paul starts off with mercy. It's not the list I would have started off with, right? If I'm writing a list, I'm not starting with mercy, because that's a tough one. In fact, it's one of the hardest ones. And not just any kind of mercy, tender-hearted mercy. And some translations say compassion. And so we think we're off the hook. I have compassion for the homeless, right? Listen, that doesn't make you special. The world has compassion for the homeless. Like that, you're not set apart because you have compassion for the homeless. Compassion is the wrong word. This idea of tender-hearted mercy is the right word. What does it mean? That means when people wrong you, you do not allow your heart to harden. It means that you remain tender toward that person. It doesn't mean you allow them to hurt you over and over again, but it means that you don't allow your heart to harden so that you think in your mind and come to a place where you think you can hurt them back. Tender-hearted mercy is when I don't take the right for revenge, right? And this is hard to have tender-hearted mercy when you know the other person's wrong. Can we be honest? It's hard when when you know they're wrong. When you know they're absolutely wrong, it's hard to have tender-hearted mercy because you want to show them how they're wrong, right? And Paul's saying, listen, no, it's not about showing them. It's about having mercy for them right where they are. You're going to be identified by what you put on, right? Maybe try, instead of making them see things from your side, maybe try to help people see things, or maybe try to help see things from their side, right? Oftentimes, we only have one perspective. It's ours, and it's right. Yeah? I always tell my kids when it comes to politics, if you can't see the other side, you're probably too far one way or the other, right? If you're so far one way or the other that you can't see the other side, you're probably too far. And that's true in every argument. If you can't see where they're coming from, if you don't have the mercy to be able to hear what they're saying and say, you know what, you might have a point, you're not very tender-hearted, right? So thanks for nothing, Paul. We'll move on. Next, he says, as followers, we should be outfitted in kindness. And the thing is, we often mistake kindness for nice. We're just going to be nice, right? There are a lot of nice people who are not very kind, right? How many of you guys know someone who's nice until the person they don't like walks away, right? They're nice to their face, but they say something behind their back. That's not kindness, in case you were wondering, right? Kindness is this idea of being generous of yourself. That's what kindness is. If you go into the original Greek, that's what they're talking about. Being generous of yourself, being generous of your time, of your effort, of the ability to give to other people, where you see a need and you meet it. That's kindness. Kindness isn't niceness. I could be nice and do nothing. Kindness is compelled to action. It's seeing a need and saying, I have the unique ability in this moment to do something about it. My wife tried something with our kids. It didn't work. She tried this. She said, if you see something wrong, you are now 51% responsible to do something about it. Well, our kids would just pretend they didn't see it, so it never worked, right? But here's the thing. If you see a need in that moment, don't wait for someone else to meet it. That's not kind. You are now 51% responsible to be Jesus in that situation. To see the need and try to meet it. This is what it looks like. This is the life of a follower. You don't get to be bitter. You don't get to have a hard heart. And when you see needs, you have to meet it. I don't like this list. This is inconvenient. I want the just go to church for an hour and a half on Sunday kind of faith. That makes it a lot easier, but that's not what Jesus calls us to. The life of a follower looks very, very different. And kindness, listen, kindness does this without expecting reciprocity. They don't expect anything in return. I've heard so many people over the years when in church, in ministry, say, well, I did that for them and they never said they were thank you, and so I'm never doing it again. You're not very kind. You're kind of selfish. Kindness is doing something and not expecting anything in return. Kindness is telling someone you forgive them and not expecting them to say, I forgive you back. Because see, sometimes we'll say, hey, I forgive you, and then they don't say it, and then we stop forgiving them, right? We're like, okay, well, then I take it back. That's not how it works. Kindness expects nothing in return. So we're starting to get a picture of what a follower is, and like I said, it's inconvenient. It's not about us. It's about representing the one that we claim to follow. And you are going to be known by your fruit. Listen, if you're not kind and you're not tenderhearted, you're probably not following Jesus. And I hate to say it that way, but that's the God's honest truth. We're either moving towards Jesus or we're moving toward ourselves. There's really no option. And we too often, especially in Western culture, we get so caught up in what we want that we stop asking what God wants. We start thinking about our comfort, which, listen, that's the true God Americans serve. It's our comfort. And we stop talking about how we should be meeting other people in their need. It's about who we represent, and it's not easy. So next, Paul tells us this humility. Here's what humility does. A lot of people think humility is, like, hey, you're really good at that. Oh, I'm not very good at that. Thanks. So, it's that false humility. That's all bull. You guys know what I'm talking about. You guys run into it. Like, this is what humility does. Humility allows us to see someone else as equals. That's what humility does. Humility says, I am not in a position that's over you, that's better than you. I am not, it doesn't matter societally, it doesn't matter wealth-wise, doesn't matter the neighborhood I live. I don't look at someone and say, I'm better than. I look at someone and I say, I'm same as. We're in the same boat together. But that's not how we often think, right? Humility is seeing someone the same, as being in the same position. And it's not because of anything we've done, it's because Jesus sees us and loves us equally. Like, you don't have a leg up on Jesus' love, on God's love. I mean, some of you might think you're his favorite, but it's not quite how it works, right? See, The lie in our culture is having more makes you more. But we saw Jesus in a couple parables say, having more makes it harder. Having more makes it even almost impossible to follow me where I want you to go. And so this idea of humility is I'm not better than, I'm same as. And then through kindness, I'm going to serve you however I can with a tender heart, right? I've heard so many people tell homeless people, why don't you get a job? Listen, that should never come out of a Christian's mouth. Ever. That's not kind. And I'm not saying you should condone all their actions. I'm just saying if you've not walked a mile in their shoes, who are you to say anything? That's not humble. That's not walking in humility. That's walking in judgment. And it's wrong. Well, Paul continues. He says, gentleness. And here's the thing about gentleness. Gentleness is a decision. Okay? Gentleness is a decision. Have you ever handed a child something delicate and you're like, be careful. Be careful. Maybe it's a big brother holding his baby brother or sister for the very first time. You're like, please be careful, right? Yeah, we can make more, but let's keep this one and say, be careful, be gentle, right? That's the thing, is you have the ability to destroy, but we're just asking you to be careful, to be gentle, right? How many of you guys you've been in a delicate place, maybe emotionally, maybe you've gone through something hard, and you needed people to be gentle, to be careful with where you are. It's a choice, right? How many of you guys would say you would play catch with a hard ball differently with an adult than you would a 3-year-old, right? Like 3-year-old, I'm burning at Michael because I want him to feel it, right? But if I'm throwing it to a 3-year-old, I'm just tossing it. I have the ability to throw it as hard as I want, but I'm choosing. It's a decision, right? I'm choosing to toss it gently because I know it'll do damage if I don't. And sometimes we go through this Christian life and we don't realize we're throwing hard balls at 3-year-olds. We're doing damage to people and we don't even think about it. We think we're doing good. We're thinking we're holding up truth. But we're throwing hard balls at 3-year-olds, people who are not ready to hear what you have to say. If people didn't ask you for your opinion, keep it to yourself. There's no need to be throwing hard balls from the church. It's one of those things we got to be mindful of. This is what it looks like to be a follower, right? This is gentleness. I know that in this area you might be hurt or hurting, and so I'm choosing to be gentle. I know in this area you might have something going on, so I'm choosing, it's a choice, to be gentle. How many of you guys have ever been deeply angry during a season? And how many of you ever had someone say, just get over it? Did you get over it? No, it made you more angry, right? We do this stuff to people. We think we're helping. But when they're angry, you've got to come alongside and you got to help them develop the tender heart, to develop that, hear them, listen, help them process, help them find help. Maybe get them to a therapist. That's an idea, right? But this whole idea that you just need to get over it, get over your hurt, get over your anger, just get over it. That doesn't help people. That's not gentle, right? See, Jesus shows us we should care more about the person across from us than we do with being right or making our point. But the problem too often in the church is we're more concerned with making our point than caring for the person. And when we get that mixed up, the whole thing starts to fall apart. Which leads us to the last thing on Paul's list, which thank God, because we're getting trampled by Paul this morning, right? Patience. And we've all been patient before, whether we liked it or not, right? We've all been patient before. This is what patience is. Patience is the willingness to move at someone else's pace. Okay? That's patience. That's why we never pray for patience. All right? Ever. Don't pray for patience because you are good. God will force you to move at everybody else's pace. Don't. I'm just giving you word of the wise from experience. Don't pray for patience, right? Because your patience will be tried. And so this is what patience is. It's the willingness to move at someone else's pace, not requiring them to move at your speed, right? How many times does God just seem frustratingly slow? where we pray and we ask and we're like, are you even doing anything? Are you listening? Is this thing on? Like, what are you doing? Like, I've been asking, but that's not patience, right? It's moving at someone else's pace. We had to learn this. Our youngest kid, you guys all met Jace, our youngest kid has ADHD. Now, when he was young, we would send him to go get his shoes on. It's like a 30-second job. He had slip-ons. Like, it's not difficult, right? 5 minutes later, we're like, dude, where are you? He's like, I'm sorry, I got distracted. And we would get frustrated when he was young, when we didn't know he had ADHD. We're like, bro, pay attention. Get shoes on, let's go. Once we figured out he had ADHD, it changed the way we parented. We're like, okay, buddy, hey, you get your shoes on yet? No, sorry, I got distracted. Got your shoes on yet? Sorry, Dad. You know, it's a 20-minute process. Like, you got to be ready, like, way in advance. Like, you don't get to just leave. Like, you got to pick them up and all this stuff. Like, all right, let's go to the car. Like, it's just the way it is. And so patience is moving at someone else's pace, right? I could get angry and just beside myself and just frustrated and tell them, you need to figure this out. You need to get over ADHD. But look, can I just tell you, as a parent, that'd be terrible. But we do this. We do this to our culture all the time. You just got to get over it. You got to get better. You got to move. You got to get closer to Jesus. You got to stop living like that. You got to make better decisions. None of that is helpful. None of that is helpful. I love what he says next. Make allowance. In other words, make room, because it's going to happen. Make space. Expect this to happen. Make allowance for each other's faults. Oh, bro, it was already rough. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us together in perfect harmony. Forgive everyone? Anyone? Are you sure, Paul? Because there are some really bad people that I don't think I should have to forgive. There are people that have done some terrible things. There are people that have said terrible things. There are people that have betrayed me. There are people that have stole from me. There are people that have broken relationship again and again and again. And you're telling me I should make allowance for that? Yes. Exactly what I'm telling you. Because just in case you don't know you, let me help you out. Over and over again, we have broken relationship. We have stolen. We have lied to God. We have lived a life that has not lived up to him, and he loves us anyway, and that's supposed to be the model. But we don't like that. We like righteous anger, where we get to tell you what's up, right? But that's not how it works. If people see what we're wearing, if we're clothed in supposed to be bringing harmony, showing people love, because, by the way, love is the way we're going to be known as one of his followers, right? We have to be clothed differently. The way we respond and react has to be different. Make allowance and forgive. Why? Because God forgave you. Paul says it like this: remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Love like I have loved. Because love is how you're going to show the world that you're a follower of mine. Be merciful like I'm merciful. How many of you guys are grateful for God's mercy? Be merciful like I'm merciful. Love the way I love. That's how the world's going to know you're a follower of mine. I want you to be gentle. I want you to be patient like God is patient. How many of you are grateful that God is willing to move at our speed? Like he didn't come and smite me because I didn't get it right today, right? Thank God for that. He's willing to move at my speed. This is the love of God. He moves at our speed. And he doesn't require us to move at his. Be patient like God is patient. Be gentle. Forgive the way he forgives. Well, they didn't forgive me. That's fine. That wasn't part of the deal. Part of the deal wasn't they had to forgive you too, right? This is what it's supposed to look like to be a follower. If we're following Jesus, if we're endeavoring to be like Jesus, if we're endeavoring to show this world Jesus, if we're supposed to go and merge churches and be Jesus, can I just tell you, we've got to be wearing different things when we walk in the room. If we're wearing all of our hurt and all of our pain, all of our anger, all of our frustration, if we're wearing all this stuff everywhere we go, can I just tell you, the world is not encountering Jesus through you. They are encountering more of the world. And we are supposed to be. We are called to be different. Remember, Jesus said, I'm not going to be here for a little bit. I'm leaving. And I got a new commandment. Where are you going, Jesus? It doesn't matter. You don't get to go with me. I'm giving you a commandment because you're going to continue my ministry in my absence. You are going to love the way I love. That's how the world's going to know. You're going to clothe yourself differently because that's how the world is going to know. Merciful, kind, humble, gentle, patient, forgiving, and loving. Now, maybe you're better off than I am. Maybe that's an easier list for you. But I got teenagers, right? This is not an easy list sometimes. I get frustrated. I lack patience. I'm not always kind. God knows I want to be. But the little suckers make it hard sometimes. I'm supposed to be all those things. Paul, I appreciate your little list. Let's snap back to reality for a minute here, right? This isn't how anybody else lives, Paul. That's the point. That's the point. We're supposed to be different. This isn't an a la carte menu we get to select from. I'm not going to be humble today. I'm not going to be forgiving today. This isn't something we get to choose. It's something we wear every day. It's part of the complete outfit, right? It's what a follower of Jesus looks like. We're supposed to be pressing for these things, wanting more of these things. And some of us are further along than others. Some of us have some of this more figured out than others. Some of us have parts nailed and struggle with others. But listen, just because some part of it's hard right now, don't give up. Because it won't always be. This is like a muscle. The more you work forgiveness, the easier it is to forgive. The more you work being humble, true humility, seeing people as equal, not the false humility, yeah, I'm not very good at that. The more you work to love, it's easier to love. We will be identified, Paul tells us, by how we live and interact, by what we're wearing. Jesus says you're going to be identified by what you're doing to the people all around us. So the question we need to ask ourselves, church, and this is the question I want you to even write down, because I want you to be honest about the answer. And maybe not today, but you're going to wrestle with it over the next week. Ready? Does the God we claim to follow really change the way we live? Does the God we claim to follow really change the way we live? That's the question I have for you. Is it impacting the way you think, the way you act, the way you love, the way you talk to people, the way you interact, the way you see a need and you meet it, how kind you are? Does it change you? Because if it doesn't, if the God you're following doesn't require change, again, it's probably not Jesus. Because Jesus is constantly refining us to be more and more like him. Maybe we should reevaluate ourselves just a little bit. How much do I reflect the one I claim to follow? In some of these areas, listen, we might not like the answer, and that's good. That's good. In some of these areas, we might not like what we find, and that's okay. That's growth that can happen. That's development. That's becoming more and more like Christ, right? Lord, give us grace, not patience. Lord, help us to begin to live and love and talk and respond the way you would. And in those gross areas that we don't like to talk about, in those gross areas we've gotten good at putting a facade on, that we hide away, in those areas we're never honest about, Lord, in all those things, would you begin to peel back the veneer and help us press into who it is you're calling us to be, the change we're supposed to embody, the people you're calling us to be. Listen, Jesus, following you will always cost us something. And it doesn't mean we always get it right, but it does mean that we should be pressing for and endeavoring to become a lot more like you because we say we're following you. Christian means little Christ. Are we? church. Like Jesus, when he first called Matthew, I don't think any of us change overnight. But it's a process. As we continue to press after the one we claim to follow, we'll learn to become more and more like him. Jesus, would those here be lights wherever they go? Would those here make a decision to pivot these areas of their lives that are far or don't reflect you toward you? Lord, in the areas where you have us doing work, would we have the boldness to invite someone in as accountability so that they can help us move forward in that process? God, work in us. May we clothe ourselves with kindness and humility, patience and love, making room for one another's faults, Lord, because it's going to happen. Help us become more like you. As we follow you, Lord, help us begin to act and interact the way you would, with the same love and mercy that you showed us. Thank you, Lord, in your name.